Minseo Park stood outside the Metropolitan Museum of Contemporary Art and looked up at the tall glass building. Bright lights shone from inside. Well-dressed people walked through the golden doors. She pulled her old cardigan tighter around her body. The evening air was cool, and she had worn her most comfortable shoes. They were old but clean. She was 62 years old. Her hair was gray and pulled back in a simple style. She wore no makeup. Her hands showed the marks of many years of work. Around her neck hung a pair of reading glasses on a thin chain. In her hand she carried a canvas tote bag that had seen better days. Minseo took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. A security guard stood by the door. He looked at her and frowned. His eyes moved from her worn shoes to her simple clothes. "Excuse me, ma'am," the guard said. "The service entrance is around the back." Minseo smiled gently. "I am here for the exhibition." The guard looked surprised. He checked his clipboard and waved her through, though his expression showed doubt. Inside, the gallery was full of people. Women wore expensive dresses and high heels. Men wore suits that cost more than most people earned in a month. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter filled the air. The smell of perfume mixed with the scent of fresh paint and new carpets. Minseo walked slowly through the crowd. People moved away from her without looking at her directly. It was as if she was invisible. She did not mind. She had come to see the paintings, not the people. She stopped in front of a large painting on the white wall. The painting showed a winter landscape. Snow covered everything. A single tree stood alone in the center. The branches were bare, reaching up to a gray sky. The title on the small card read "Echo of Silence." Below that it said, "Artist M.S. Minseo stared at the painting for a long time." Her eyes grew soft. Memories filled her mind. She remembered the day she had painted this, 15 years ago. It was just after her mother had died. She had mixed the blue paint with her own tears. She had worked through the night trying to capture the feeling of loss and silence. "Excuse me." A young woman's voice broke through her thoughts. Minseo turned. A woman in her late 20s stood there. She wore a black dress and held a tablet computer. Her name tag said Jessica, gallery assistant, yes? Minseo said quietly. Jessica smiled, but it was not a kind smile. "I think you might be lost. This is a private event for collectors and art patrons. I am here to see the paintings," Minseo replied. Jessica's smile became tighter. "Well, the gift shop is downstairs. They have lovely postcards of the artwork. Much more affordable." She said the word affordable as if it tasted bad in her mouth. Nearby, a group of young art students heard the conversation. They turned to look. One of them, a young man with styled hair, laughed. He pulled out his phone and took a photo of Minseo. "Look at this," he said to his friends. "Someone's grandmother wandered in by mistake." His friends laughed. One girl covered her mouth, trying to hide her smile. But her eyes showed amusement. Minseo felt her face grow warm, but she kept her expression calm. She had faced worse in her life. She turned back to the painting. "The technique is interesting," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "The way the light hits the snow. The artist used cold colors, but there is warmth underneath." Jessica heard her and moved closer. "I don't think you understand this kind of art. It's very complex. Very sophisticated." "I see," Minseo said. She pointed to a corner of the painting. "The brushstrokes here. They move in a specific pattern, like waves. It creates movement even in stillness." A tall man in an expensive suit approached. His hair was perfectly styled with gray at the temples. He wore gold cufflinks that caught the light. His name tag identified him as Richard Thornton, gallery director. "Is there a problem here?" he asked Jessica, but his eyes were on Minseo. "This woman seems confused," Jessica said. "I was just explaining that this is a private event." Richard looked Minseo up and down. His lip curled slightly. "Ma'am, I'm sure you mean well, but this exhibition is for serious art collectors. Perhaps you would be more comfortable at a community center gallery." Minseo met his eyes. "I am simply looking at the paintings." "Is that not allowed?" "We have standards to maintain," Richard said. His voice was not loud, but people nearby turned to watch. "Our patrons expect a certain atmosphere. I'm sure you understand." "I understand that art should be for everyone," Minseo said quietly. Richard laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Art is for everyone who can appreciate it and afford it. This painting alone is worth $3 million. More people had gathered now. They whispered to each other behind their hands. Some looked amused. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. "Could you please step aside?" Richard said. "There are real patrons waiting to view this piece." A woman in diamonds pushed forward. "Yes, please." "We can't see." Min Seo looked at the painting one more time. She noticed details that no one else could see. The hidden signature in the brushstrokes, the exact shade of blue she had mixed that cold morning, the tiny tear stain that had fallen on the canvas before the paint dried. "The artist," Min Seo said quietly, "painted this with great sadness. You can see it in every stroke." Richard's patience was gone. "Thank you for your observations, but the artist MS is a reclusive genius. One of the greatest living painters. I doubt you could understand the depth of emotion in this work." Jessica touched Min Seo's elbow gently but firmly. "Come on, let me show you to the exit." Min Seo allowed herself to be guided through the crowd. People parted for them, then closed ranks again quickly. She heard whispers following her. Who was that? Some confused old woman. Did you see her clothes? How did she even get in here? At the door, Jessica released her arm. "I'm sorry, but you really shouldn't try to come back. This isn't the place for you." Min Seo reached the exit and paused. She turned and looked back at the crowded gallery. Richard was now standing in front of Echo of Silence, explaining the painting to a group of collectors. His hands moved dramatically as he spoke. He described techniques and meanings that existed only in his imagination. The art students who had laughed at her were now taking selfies in front of another painting. They posed and smiled, not really looking at the art at all. Jessica had returned to her tablet, typing notes and looking important. None of them knew. None of them could know. They saw only what they expected to see. A simple old woman in worn clothes could not possibly understand great art. She could not possibly belong in their world of champagne and expensive suits. Min Seo smiled softly to herself. It was a smile that held many years of secrets. She adjusted her old cardigan and stepped out into the cool evening air. Behind her, the gallery glowed with bright lights and loud voices. People admired paintings they did not understand, created by an artist they would never know. They placed value on mystery and exclusivity, not on the art itself. Min Seo walked down the street toward the subway station. Her comfortable shoes made no sound on the pavement. In her canvas bag, she carried a small sketchbook and some pencils. She always carried them. You never knew when inspiration might come. Tomorrow, she thought, would be interesting. Very interesting indeed. The gallery had sent her an invitation weeks ago, an invitation to the unveiling of her newest painting. They had sent it to her private post office box addressed simply to MS. She wondered what they would think when they saw it. The painting was titled Invisible. It showed an elderly woman in simple clothes standing in an art gallery. Around her, shadowy figures pointed and laughed, but the woman herself was painted with golden light, surrounded by beauty that the shadows could not see. Min Seo had painted her own story. Tomorrow they would see it. They just would not know they were looking at the truth. She reached the subway entrance and descended the stairs. The trains rumbled below. Above her, the city lights sparkled against the dark sky. She was just another face in the crowd, anonymous and overlooked. Exactly as she had always wanted to be. Until now, perhaps. Things were beginning to change. She could feel it like the shift of seasons, like the first brush of paint on a blank canvas tomorrow would tell. Min Seo sat on the subway train and watched the dark tunnel walls flash past the window. The train rocked gently. Other passengers sat around her, lost in their phones or their thoughts. No one looked at her. She was used to being invisible. She thought back to another subway ride 40 years ago. She had been 22 then, fresh off a plane from Seoul. She had arrived in New York City with 2 suitcases and a heart full of dreams. Her English was poor. Her money was less. But her hands could paint. That was all that mattered. Those early years had been hard. She worked at a laundromat during the day, folding other people's clothes. At night, she cleaned office buildings. The work was exhausting, but it gave her something important. Time alone in beautiful buildings surrounded by art. She remembered standing in empty lobbies at 3 a.m, mop in hand, staring up at paintings on the walls. She studied every brushstroke. She memorized colors and techniques. She taught herself by looking, by learning, by loving the art that surrounded her. Her tiny apartment in Queens had barely enough room for a bed and an easel. She painted in the early morning hours before work. She painted on her days off. She painted when she was too tired to stand, sitting on the floor with a canvas propped against the wall. The paintings she created in those days were raw and emotional. They showed her loneliness, her struggles, her homesickness for Korea. She poured everything into her work, but the galleries would not take them. Too emotional, they said. Not commercial enough. We're looking for something more sophisticated. The art market wants names, not unknowns. One gallery owner had been particularly cruel. He had looked at her paintings for less than a minute. Then he had told her to go home and learn to paint pretty flowers. That's what sells from Asian artists, he had said. Cherry blossoms, koi fish, that kind of thing. Minseo had gathered her paintings and left. She had cried on the subway ride home. But the next morning she had picked up her brush again. She could not stop creating any more than she could stop breathing. Years passed. She worked. She painted. She was rejected again and again. She started signing her work simply as MS. It felt safer somehow. More mysterious. Less personal when the rejections came. Then 20 years ago, everything changed. She had left 3 paintings at a tiny gallery in Brooklyn. The owner was a kind older man named David Chen. He had actually looked at her work. Really looked at it. A week later, he had called her. "These paintings are extraordinary," he had said. "I want to show them." Minseo had been afraid. "Will you tell people my name?" David had paused. "Why does that matter?" "Because I want people to see the art," she had said. "Not me, not my story. Just the paintings," David had understood. "Then we'll keep your secret." But these paintings deserve to be seen. The first painting had sold within days. A collector had paid $5,000 for it. Minseo had cried when David told her. She had never had so much money in her life. More galleries started asking for her work. David protected her identity carefully. He became the only person who knew who MS really was. He handled everything. He never revealed her secret. Over the years, her paintings had grown more valuable. Her technique had matured. Critics wrote about her work, calling it profound, moving, revolutionary. They created stories about who MS might be. Some said MS was a European painter in exile. Others said MS was actually a group of artists working together. The mystery grew. The prices grew too. Her paintings started selling for tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions. It seemed impossible, but Minseo had never changed her life. She stayed in her small apartment in Queens. She still took the subway. She still wore her comfortable old clothes. She still painted in the early morning hours just as she always had. The money went into a private foundation. She used it to fund art programs in poor neighborhoods. She gave scholarships to young artists who struggled as she once had. She did this anonymously, just as she painted anonymously. Her daughter Ji-won had been born during those early struggling years. Minseo had raised her alone, working 3 jobs while painting whenever she could. Ji-won had grown up watching her mother create beautiful things in the middle of poverty. Now Ji-won was a doctor. She was successful and proud of her mother. She was one of only 3 people who knew the truth. The others were David Chen and Minseo's lawyer, who handled the money matters. The subway train pulled into Minseo's station. She stood and walked to the doors. The platform was crowded with people heading home from work. She climbed the stairs slowly. Her knees were not as strong as they used to be. Her apartment building was old but clean. She climbed 3 flights of stairs. The elevator had been broken for months. She unlocked her door and stepped inside. The apartment was small and neat. One room served as both bedroom and living room. The kitchen was tiny, but one corner was filled with light from a large window. This was where she painted. Her easel stood there, a half-finished canvas waiting for her. Minseo put water on to boil for tea. She changed out of her cardigan and into an even older, more paint-stained sweater. This was her painting sweater. It was covered in colors from hundreds of different paintings. Her phone rang. She saw Ji-won's name on the screen. "Hello, daughter," she said. "Mom, how did it go?" Ji-won's voice was warm and full of laughter. "Did you see their faces when they recognized you?" "They did not recognize me," Minseo said simply. "They asked me to leave." There was silence on the phone. Then Ji-won spoke again, her voice tight with anger. "They what?" Minseo told her daughter what had happened. The security guard, Jessica, Richard Thornton, the laughing art students, being escorted out like an unwanted guest. Ji-won was furious. "Mom, this is exactly why you should reveal yourself. These people are terrible. They judge you by your clothes instead of seeing who you really are. They see what they expect to see, Minseo said calmly. She poured hot water over her tea bag. The world has always been this way. But you could change it. You could show them that great artists don't have to look a certain way or come from certain places. Minseo sat in her chair by the window. Outside, the city lights were coming on. Maybe, she said. But I have always believed that art should speak for itself. My story should not matter more than my paintings. Your story matters, Mom. You came here with nothing. You worked so hard. You created something beautiful, despite everything. That story could inspire people. Or it could become more important than the art itself, Minseo said. People would see my paintings differently if they knew my story. They would look for my struggles in every brushstroke. They would value the art because of who I am, not because of what I created. Jiwon sighed. I understand. But Mom, they were cruel to you today. Yes, Minseo agreed. They were. But I have faced worse. Remember when you were young and we had no heat in winter? Remember when we ate rice and kimchi for a month because that was all we could afford? Today was nothing compared to that. You're too forgiving, Jiwon said, but her voice was softer now, full of love. They talked for a while longer. Jiwon told her about her day at the hospital. Minseo listened and smiled. Her daughter had grown up to be strong and kind. That was worth more than any painting could ever be. After the call ended, Minseo sat quietly with her tea. She thought about the people at the gallery. Richard Thornton with his expensive suit and his cruel words. Jessica with her fake smile and her assumptions. The art students who had laughed at her like she was a joke. They had judged her without knowing anything about her. They had decided she did not belong in their world of champagne and high heels. They had looked at her simple clothes and seen someone less than them. But the truth was she had created the very art they claimed to understand. She had poured her soul onto those canvases. She had worked for decades to develop her technique. She knew more about painting than any of them would ever know, and tomorrow they would unveil her newest work. They would stand in front of Invisible and discuss its meaning. They would analyze the brushstrokes and the colors. They would admire the artist MS, never knowing they had thrown that artist out of the gallery just the night before. Minseo smiled to herself. Life was strange and full of ironies. She stood and walked to her easel. The half-finished painting showed a sunrise over the city. The sky was filled with colors, pink and orange and gold. She picked up her brush and began to paint. Her email notification chimed. She wiped her hands and checked her phone. The message was from the gallery, sent to her private email address that only David Chen knew. Dear MS, it read, We are honored to invite you to the unveiling of your latest masterpiece, Invisible, tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. This promises to be the most significant event of the season. We hope you can attend. It was signed by Richard Thornton. Minseo read it twice. Then she began to laugh. It was a soft, quiet laugh, but it was full of genuine amusement. Richard Thornton had invited MS to attend the unveiling. The same Richard Thornton who had escorted her out of the gallery just hours before. He had no idea that the confused old woman in the worn cardigan was the same person he was trying so hard to impress. She put down her phone and looked at the painting on her easel. The sunrise was almost complete. It needed just a few more touches. The next evening, the Metropolitan Museum of Contemporary Art was even more crowded than before. Television cameras lined the entrance. Reporters stood with microphones, interviewing anyone who looked important. The unveiling of a new MS painting was major news in the art world. Inside the gallery, hundreds of people packed the space. They wore their finest clothes. Jewelry sparkled under the bright lights. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne and small expensive foods that looked like art themselves. Richard Thornton stood near the covered painting, soaking in the attention. He wore a different suit tonight, even more expensive than the one before. His smile was broad as he shook hands and accepted congratulations as if he had painted the masterpiece himself. Jessica moved through the crowd with her tablet, checking names off the guest list. She had curled her hair specially for tonight. She knew television cameras would be filming. This was her chance to be seen as an important person in the art world. Near the entrance, a reporter was interviewing a famous art collector. What makes MS's work so special? The reporter asked. The collector, an older woman dripping with diamonds, spoke confidently. MS captures the human soul. Every painting tells a story of depth and emotion, that lesser artists simply cannot achieve. The mystery of the artist's identity only adds to the magic. The reporter nodded seriously and turned to the camera. You heard it here first. Tonight we may finally learn more about the mysterious MS, the most sought-after artist of our generation. Outside, Min Seo stood on the sidewalk with her daughter Ji-won. She wore the same cardigan as the night before and the same comfortable shoes. Ji-won stood beside her in a professional dress and heels, but she had agreed to stay in the background. Are you sure about this, Mom? Ji-won asked. Min Seo looked up at the bright lights of the gallery. No, she said honestly. But I think it is time. They walked toward the entrance together. The same security guard from the night before stood at the door. He saw Min Seo and his eyes widened. He opened his mouth to speak, probably to tell her to leave again. But Min Seo reached into her canvas bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was the invitation that had been sent to MS. The security guard looked at it, confusion spreading across his face. This invitation is for MS, he said slowly. Yes, Min Seo replied calmly. I know. The guard looked from the invitation to Min Seo's worn clothes and back again. He did not understand, but the invitation was real and official. He had no choice but to let her through. Go ahead, he said, still confused. Min Seo and Ji-won entered the gallery. People moved around them like water flowing around stones. No one really looked at Min Seo. She was just another old woman, probably someone's grandmother who had wandered in by mistake. Ji-won found a spot near the wall where she could watch but not draw attention. Min Seo moved slowly through the crowd, blending in, invisible as always. Near the center of the room, the covered painting waited on the wall. A large piece of black velvet cloth hid it from view. The frame was ornate in gold, probably worth thousands of dollars by itself. Richard Thornton was speaking to a group of reporters. MS has outdone themselves with this piece, he said, gesturing dramatically toward the covered painting. In my 20 years as gallery director, I have never encountered work of such profound importance. Will MS be here tonight? A reporter asked. Richard smiled mysteriously. MS values privacy above all else, but I have developed a special relationship with the artist over the years. I like to think I understand MS better than anyone. Min Seo heard this and had to hide a smile. Richard had never met her. He had never spoken to her. All his communications went through David Chen, and even David only forwarded messages, never revealing anything about her. Jessica pushed through the crowd, her eyes bright with excitement. A television camera followed her. This is the most important night of my career, she told the reporter breathlessly. Working with MS's art has been an honor. The way we curated this exhibition, every detail was perfect. Min Seo watched Jessica take credit for work she had not done. The curator who had actually arranged the exhibition was standing quietly in a corner, unnoticed and uninterviewed. The art students from the night before were there too. They had dressed up for the cameras. The young man who had taken Min Seo's photo was now being interviewed. What do you think MS is trying to say with this new work? The reporter asked him. The student spoke confidently, using big words and art terms. He talked about postmodern perspectives and deconstructionist approaches. Min Seo listened and realized he had no idea what he was talking about. He was just using words that sounded impressive. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard's voice boomed through the gallery. If I could have your attention, please. The crowd quieted and turned toward him. Cameras focused. People held up their phones to record the moment. Tonight, Richard continued, we unveil what I believe to be MS's most powerful work yet, a painting that speaks to the very nature of existence, to the invisible forces that shape our lives. He paused for effect, enjoying the attention. I give you invisible. Two gallery assistants stepped forward and carefully removed the black velvet cloth. It fell away slowly, revealing the painting beneath. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed. For a moment, there was complete silence. The painting showed an elderly woman in simple clothes. She wore a worn cardigan and comfortable shoes. Reading glasses hung on a chain around her neck. She stood in an art gallery surrounded by well-dressed people. But the people were painted as dark shadows with blurred faces. They pointed at the woman. They laughed at her. Their body language showed mockery and dismissal, but the woman herself was painted with extraordinary light. She glowed with soft golden colors. Her face was serene and kind. Around her, Barely visible unless you looked closely were ghostly images of beautiful paintings. They floated in the air near her like dreams made real. The woman's eyes looked directly out of the painting. They seemed to see everything. They held wisdom and sadness and quiet strength. It was a haunting painting. It was beautiful and painful at the same time. Everyone who looked at it felt something stir inside them. Richard recovered from his surprise first. "As you can see," he announced, "MS has created a powerful commentary on the nature of invisibility in our society. The central figure represents the unseen forces of artistic creation." A famous art critic pushed forward to examine the painting more closely. He was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a serious expression. He studied the brushwork, the colors, the composition. "Remarkable," he murmured. "The technique here is extraordinary. Look at how the light surrounds the central figure. It's almost religious in quality. This is clearly a self-portrait of sorts." MS is making a statement about the artist's place in society. Other critics joined him, analyzing every detail. They discussed symbolism and meaning. They debated what message MS was sending. Jessica stood near the painting with her tablet, nodding as if she understood everything. A reporter approached her for a comment. "This piece represents everything we value at this gallery," Jessica said smoothly. "The profound emotional depth, the technical mastery. We knew immediately that this was MS's most important work." Near the back of the crowd, one of the gallery workers, a young woman named Sarah, stared at the painting with a strange expression. She turned to her co-worker. "That woman in the painting," Sarah said slowly. "She looks familiar." Her co-worker, a young man named Marcus, leaned closer to look. "You're right. Where have we seen her before?" Sarah's eyes suddenly went wide. "The old woman from last night. The one Jessica asked to leave. That's her." Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his social media. He had posted a photo the night before, making fun of the confused grandma who had wandered into the gallery. He held up his phone, comparing the photo to the painting. They were identical. The same cardigan, the same comfortable shoes, the same reading glasses on a chain, the same gentle, knowing expression. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "That's so weird. Should we tell someone?" Marcus asked. They looked at each other uncertainly. Then they looked at Jessica and Richard, who were basking in the attention of the media. They decided to stay quiet. It was probably just a strange coincidence, but Min Seo had seen their recognition. She had watched the moment when they realized the truth. She stayed still, waiting to see what would happen next. Richard was announcing the sale of the painting. "I am pleased to confirm that Invisible has been purchased for $4.2 million. The buyer wishes to remain anonymous, but I can tell you they are a serious collector with impeccable taste." The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed again. Richard beamed with pride. Ji-won, standing against the wall, smiled to herself. She was the anonymous buyer. She had purchased her mother's self-portrait with money from the foundation Min Seo had created. The money would go right back to funding art programs for poor children. But no one here knew that. A prominent art critic approached the painting again. He was the same man who had analyzed it before. He stood very close, examining a corner of the canvas. "The detail work here is exceptional," he said to no one in particular. "Look at the hands of the central figure. You can see paint stains under the fingernails. Such attention to reality." Another critic joined him. "And the eyes. They seem to see right through you. It's as if MS is looking out at all of us, judging us." "Perhaps that's exactly what MS is doing," the first critic said thoughtfully. "This could be a critique of the art world itself. The way we value appearance over substance. The way we judge people by their clothes rather than their talent." Richard overheard this and quickly joined the conversation. "Exactly right," he said, even though he had not thought of this interpretation himself. MS is holding up a mirror to society. This is what makes MS a genius, the ability to make us question our own assumptions. A waiter moved through the crowd near Min Seo, carrying a tray of champagne glasses. He nearly bumped into her. "Excuse me," he said, not really looking at her. Then he paused. He looked at Min Seo more carefully. His eyes moved to the painting and back to her. His face went pale. But before he could say anything, a guest called for more champagne and he had to move on. He kept glancing back at Min Seo with a confused expression. More people were starting to notice the similarity. Whispers began to spread through the crowd. but no one wanted to say anything out loud. It seemed too impossible, too strange. Surely the old woman in the worn cardigan could not be connected to this $4 million masterpiece. A famous art critic, an elegant older man named Thomas Wellington, approached Minseo. He did not seem to notice her resemblance to the painting. He thought she was simply a cleaner or perhaps a guest servant. "Excuse me," he said imperiously. "Could you fetch me a glass of champagne? And make sure it's the good bottle, not the cheap stuff they're serving to everyone else." Minseo looked at him for a long moment. His expensive suit, his confident assumption that she was there to serve him, his complete inability to see her as anything other than help. She smiled gently. "I am afraid I do not work here." Thomas looked annoyed. "Oh, well, where are the waiters then? This service is terrible." He walked away, muttering to himself about declining standards. He never gave Minseo a second thought. He had spoken to the artist whose work he claimed to admire, and had not recognized her at all. Minseo stood in the middle of the crowded gallery, surrounded by people who praised her work while looking right through her. She thought about all the years of anonymity, all the years of letting the paintings speak for themselves. She looked at Invisible hanging on the wall, her self-portrait, her truth painted for everyone to see, and still they did not see it. Maybe Jiwon was right. Maybe it was time to make them see. Not for her own sake, but to prove a point. To show that genius and talent did not wear expensive clothes or come from expected places. She reached into her canvas bag and touched the sketchbook inside. In it were the original drawings for Invisible, preliminary studies, notes in her own handwriting about colors and techniques, proof that she had created this painting. The question was, what would she do with that proof? Would she reveal herself tonight in front of all these cameras and important people, or would she stay invisible a little longer? She looked around the gallery one more time, at Richard taking credit for things he did not do, at Jessica, pretending to understand art she had never truly seen, at the critics who spoke in big words but missed the truth right in front of them. Then she made her decision. Marcus, the young gallery worker, could not stop staring at the painting and then at Minseo. He moved through the crowd slowly, trying to get closer to where she stood. His phone was in his hand, the photo from last night still on his screen. He was an art blogger on the side. He wrote reviews and articles about exhibitions, trying to build a following. He had thousands of readers who trusted his opinions. But right now he was not thinking about his blog. He was thinking about the impossible coincidence in front of him. The old woman in his photo and the woman in the $4 million painting were the same person. The same cardigan, the same shoes, the same glasses on a chain. Even the expression was identical, that gentle, knowing look. But it was more than just the appearance. Marcus looked closer at his photo. He zoomed in on the woman's hands. There, barely visible in the picture, were paint stains under her fingernails. Paint stains, the kind that came from actually painting, not from admiring paintings in a gallery. His heart began to beat faster. Could it be possible? Could this simple old woman actually be MS? He approached her carefully, respectfully. Unlike the others, he saw her. Really saw her, excuse me, he said softly. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Minseo turned to him. She saw his phone in his hand and the photo on the screen. She saw the recognition in his eyes. But she also saw something else, kindness, respect, real curiosity, not mockery. "Yes," she said. "I'm Marcus. I work here at the gallery." He paused, unsure how to continue. "I took this photo last night. I'm not proud of it. I thought you were, well, I thought you didn't belong here. I was wrong." Minseo appreciated his honesty. "I see." Marcus gathered his courage. "But now I'm looking at the painting and I'm looking at you and—" He stopped. He was afraid to say what he was thinking. It sounded crazy. "Would you be willing to talk with me? Privately? Just for a few minutes?" Minseo studied his face. She had lived long enough to read people well. This young man was genuine. He was not looking for fame or attention. He was looking for truth. "Very well," she said. "Lead the way." Marcus guided her through the crowd toward a small cafe area connected to the gallery. It was quieter there, away from the cameras and the champagne and the important people. A few tables sat empty. They sat down at one in the corner. Marcus put his phone on the table between them. "I need to ask you something, and please forgive me if I'm completely wrong. But are you MS?" Minseo did not answer directly. "Why do you think I might be?" Marcus pulled up more photos on his phone. This is you from last night, and this is the painting from today. They're identical. That's not a coincidence. MS painted you, or... He paused. Or you painted yourself. Many people look similar, Mincio said quietly. Yes, but look at this. Marcus zoomed in on the photo of her hands. Paint stains. And I checked the painting again before I came over here. The woman in the painting has the same paint stains under her fingernails. That's not something MS would add by accident. That's a detail only someone who paints would include. A true detail. Mincio remained silent, but her eyes held a spark of interest. Marcus continued, his words coming faster now. And there's more. Last night you stood in front of Echo of Silence for a long time. You talked about the brushstrokes, the technique, the emotion behind it. You saw things that no one else saw, things that critics are still trying to understand. Perhaps I simply appreciate art, Mincio said. No, it was more than appreciation. You spoke with certainty, with knowledge. Like you knew exactly how the painting was made because... Marcus took a deep breath. Because you made it. Mincio looked at this young man for a long moment. Then she asked, if I were MS, why would I tell you? Why would I reveal a secret I have kept for 20 years? Marcus put his phone down. I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe I'm completely wrong and I'll feel like a fool. But I had to ask. Because if you are MS, then what happened last night was terrible. Jessica and Richard and all of us, we treated you like you were nothing. We judged you by your clothes and your age. We couldn't see the person in front of us. And that matters to you? Mincio asked. Yes, Marcus said simply. I became interested in art because of a painting. It was called Morning After Loss. I saw it 5 years ago, right after my father died. I stood in front of it and cried. The painting showed exactly how I felt. The grief. The emptiness. The small hope that maybe eventually things would be okay again. Mincio's expression softened. She remembered painting Morning After Loss. It had been created after the death of a dear friend. She had worked on it through tears, trying to capture the weight of grief and the fragile thread of hope that kept people going. That painting changed my life, Marcus continued. It made me want to work with art, to be around it, to help other people find the same comfort I found. And now I'm sitting here possibly talking to the person who created it, and I need to know. Did you paint Morning After Loss? Mincio was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. What if I said yes? What would you do with that information? I don't know, Marcus admitted. I'm a blogger. My instinct is to write about this, to share it with the world. But... He looked at her seriously. But if you asked me not to, I wouldn't. Some things are more important than a story. Mincio reached into her canvas bag. She pulled out her sketchbook. It was old and worn, filled with drawings and notes. She opened it to a specific page and turned it so Marcus could see. The page showed preliminary sketches for Invisible, multiple drawings of an elderly woman in a gallery, studies of how light should fall, notes about colors written in Korean and English. Use gold for light, one note said. She must glow from within. They see shadows, but she is light. Marcus stared at the sketches. His hands were shaking. These are the original studies. Mincio turned to another page. It showed sketches for Morning After Loss, a figure sitting alone, notes about blue and gray tones, comments about capturing the weight of sadness. I painted that for people like you, Mincio said softly. People who were hurting and needed to see their pain reflected back to them. To know they were not alone. Marcus had tears in his eyes. You are MS. I am Mincio Park, she corrected gently. MS is just a signature. I am a person who paints. Why? Marcus asked. Why keep it secret? Why let people treat you like you're nothing when you've created some of the most important art of our generation? Mincio closed her sketchbook. Because I wanted the art to matter more than the artist. I wanted people to connect with the paintings, not with my story. I grew up poor in Korea. I came here with nothing. I worked as a cleaner and a laundry worker. If people knew that, they would see my paintings differently. They would see them as inspirational, Marcus said. They would see them as proof that anyone can create great art. Maybe, Mincio agreed. But they would also see them through the filter of my struggle. They would look for my poverty in every brushstroke. They would value the paintings because of my story, not because of what the paintings themselves say. I did not want that. Marcus understood, but he also saw the problem. Except now the art world has become so focused on mystery and exclusivity that people like Jessica and Richard think only certain types of people can create or appreciate art. Last night proved that. They couldn't imagine that you, dressed simply and speaking quietly, could possibly understand art. They threw you out of a gallery displaying your own work. Yes, Minseo said, that is the problem I did not foresee. By hiding myself, I let the art world become more elitist, not less. I wanted to erase the artist and let only the art remain. But instead they created a myth around MS. They made the mystery more important than the paintings. So what will you do? Marcus asked. Minseo looked back toward the main gallery. Through the doorway she could see the crowd still gathered around Invisible. She could see Richard basking in praise for work he did not do. She could see Jessica pretending to understand meaning she had invented. She could see collectors congratulating themselves for appreciating fine art, never knowing they had dismissed the artist the night before. I do not know yet, she said honestly. For 20 years I have been invisible. It has protected me. It has let me create in peace. But perhaps it is time for things to change. Can I show you something? Marcus asked. He pulled up his blog on his phone. I wrote about the exhibition last night. I wrote about the mystery of MS and the brilliance of the paintings. But I also wrote about the old woman who was asked to leave. I didn't name you or share your photo publicly. I just wrote that it made me uncomfortable, that it showed how the art world has lost its way. Minseo read his words. They were honest and thoughtful. Marcus had written about how art should be accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy and well-dressed. He had questioned whether the art world had become more about status than about art itself. You have a good heart, Minseo said, and you write well. The world needs more people like you in the art world. The world needs to know the truth about you, Marcus replied. Not for gossip or fame, but because your story challenges everything the art world has become. You prove that great artists can look like anyone. They can be old women in worn cardigans. They can be immigrants who worked as cleaners. They can be invisible people who society overlooks. Minseo thought about her daughter Ji-won, who had urged her to reveal herself. She thought about David Chen, who had kept her secret faithfully for 20 years. She thought about all the young artists who struggled, as she once had, who were told they did not look right or come from the right places. If I reveal myself, Minseo said slowly, I want to do it in a way that matters, not for attention or revenge, but to make a point, to change how people think about art and artists. What if I record what happens? Marcus asked. Not for my blog, but as documentation. You could decide later what to do with it. But if you're going to reveal yourself, it should be captured. It should be seen. Minseo looked at this earnest young man. He reminded her of herself at his age, full of hope and passion for art, believing that art could change the world. Very well, she said. You may record, but first I need to see something. She stood and walked back into the main gallery with Marcus following. She moved through the crowd again, still invisible to most people. She stood in front of Invisible and looked at her self-portrait one more time. The painting showed the truth. She was invisible to these people not because she was not important, but because they could not see importance in someone who looked like her. They saw only surface, only clothes and age and expectations. It was time to make them see deeper. Minseo turned to Marcus. Start recording. It is time for the invisible to become visible. Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He opened his video app and pointed the camera at Minseo. She stood in front of her painting, a small elderly woman in a worn cardigan, about to reveal a truth that would change everything. I am ready, she said quietly, and she walked forward into the crowd, toward Richard Thornton and his false pride, toward Jessica and her assumptions, toward all the people who had looked at her without seeing her. The moment of revelation had come. Minseo walked slowly toward the center of the gallery where Richard Thornton stood surrounded by reporters and collectors. Marcus followed a few steps behind, his phone recording everything. His hands shook slightly, but he kept the camera steady. People barely moved aside for Minseo. They saw her as an obstacle, not a person of importance. But she kept walking with quiet determination until she stood directly in front of the painting called Invisible. Richard was in the middle of explaining the painting's deeper meaning to a group of wealthy collectors. You see, MS is making a statement about the nature of perception itself, the way society creates invisible classes of people who I painted this, Minseo said quietly but clearly. The words cut through Richard's speech like a knife. He stopped mid-sentence and turned to look at her. So did everyone nearby. There was a moment of confused silence. Excuse me, Richard said, his voice sharp with annoyance. I painted this, Minseo repeated louder this time. I am MS. For a second no one reacted. Then laughter began to ripple through the crowd. It started with the art students, the same ones who had mocked her the night before. They laughed as if she had told a joke. Richard's face turned red. This is inappropriate. Security! No, wait, Minseo said, her voice still calm. I can prove it. More people were paying attention now. The laughter continued, but some faces showed curiosity. Television cameras, sensing something interesting was happening, turned toward the commotion. Jessica pushed through the crowd. When she saw Minseo, her expression became cold. You again. I thought we made it clear last night that you don't belong here. I belong here more than anyone, Minseo said simply. She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out her sketchbook. These are the original studies for this painting. She opened the book to the preliminary drawings of Invisible. The sketches showed multiple versions of the elderly woman in the gallery. Surrounded by shadowy figures, Richard barely glanced at them. Anyone could draw copies of a painting after seeing it. This is desperate attention-seeking. Now please leave before I have you removed again. These drawings are dated, Minseo said. She pointed to the dates written in the corner of each sketch. They were from 6 months ago, long before the painting was unveiled. And they include notes that only the artist would know. A few people leaned in to look more closely. The famous critic Thomas Wellington, the same man who had asked Minseo to fetch him champagne earlier, stepped forward. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and examined the sketches. These could be forgeries, he said dismissively. The dates could be faked. Minseo turned to the painting. The shadow in the bottom right corner. It uses a specific mixture of Prussian blue and burnt umber, with just a touch of violet. The ratio is precise. You cannot see the violet with your eyes, but it is there. It changes how the shadow feels, even if you cannot identify why. The gallery's art conservator, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Helen Park, who had been standing quietly in the corner, suddenly looked very interested. She approached the painting and pulled out a small light device from her pocket. She examined the shadow closely. She's right, Dr. Park said slowly. There is violet in this shadow. I examined this painting before it was hung, and I noted the unusual pigment mixture. But that information isn't in any of the public materials about the painting. Only I and the artist would know. The laughter had stopped now. People were paying attention. Richard's confident smile was fading. That proves nothing, Richard said, but his voice was less certain. She could have spoken to someone who examined the painting. I can describe every painting in this exhibition, Minseo said. She pointed to Echo of Silence and the painting she had stood before the night before. That one was painted 15 years ago, 3 days after my mother died in Seoul. I mixed the blue paint with my tears. There is a tiny water stain near the top left branch that came from those tears. You cannot see it now, but if you examine it closely with the right equipment, you will find it. Dr. Park was already moving toward Echo of Silence with her examination tools. The crowd watched in growing silence as she studied the area Minseo had indicated. There's definitely an old water stain here, Dr. Park confirmed, and it's under the final layers of paint, which means it happened during the painting process, not after. This information has never been published or documented in our records. Richard's face had gone pale. Jessica looked confused and frightened. The reporters sensed a major story developing. Cameras focused tightly on Minseo. An older man pushed through the crowd. It was David Chen, the gallery owner who had discovered Minseo's work 20 years ago. He was the only person who had always known her identity. He had kept her secret faithfully all these years. Now he stood before her with tears in his eyes. Minseo, he said softly. You're finally showing yourself, the crowd murmured. David Chen was respected in the art world. His word meant something. David. Minseo acknowledged him with a gentle nod. You know this woman? Richard demanded. David turned to face the crowd. I have known her for 20 years. She is the artist MS. I am the only gallery owner who knows her identity. I have protected her secret because she asked me to. But I will not protect it anymore if she chooses to reveal herself. But that's impossible, Jessica said, her voice rising. MS is a genius, a master painter. She's just an old woman. Yes, Minseo said quietly. I am an old woman. I am also MS. Those two things are not contradictory. She reached into her bag again and pulled out more proof. Photographs of her in her studio, working on various paintings over the years. Letters from David Chen addressed to her private post office box. Certificates of authenticity that she had signed as MS. But the most powerful proof was what she said next. Every painting I create has a hidden signature. It is not a written signature, but a pattern in the brushstrokes. 3 quick strokes in a specific rhythm, hidden somewhere in the painting. David knows this. He's the only other person who knows this, David nodded. It's true. She showed me this technique 20 years ago. It's her way of marking her work without using a visible signature. Show them, Minseo said. David approached invisible and pointed to a small area in the bottom left corner. Look here. You have to know what you're looking for, but once you see it, it's unmistakable. 3 brush strokes in a specific pattern. Minseo's hidden mark. Dr. Park examined the area closely. He's right. There's a deliberate pattern here. And now that I know what to look for, she moved to Echo of Silence and found the same pattern. Then to another MS painting in the gallery. It's in every painting. The same pattern. The crowd was stunned into silence. The weight of evidence was becoming impossible to deny. This simple old woman in her worn cardigan was actually MS, the most famous and mysterious artist of the generation. Richard looked like he might faint. His career was built partly on his supposed connection to MS. He had claimed to understand the artist better than anyone. He had just thrown that artist out of the gallery the night before. A reporter pushed forward with a microphone. Ms. Park, if you are truly MS, why reveal yourself now? Why keep your identity secret for so long? Minseo looked at the reporter, then at the crowd, then at the painting of herself on the wall. I kept my identity secret because I wanted the art to speak for itself. I did not want my story to become more important than my paintings. I came to America 40 years ago with nothing. I worked as a cleaner and a laundry worker while I painted. I thought if people knew this, they would see my art differently. They would see my poverty instead of my vision. She paused, looking around at all the faces watching her. But I was wrong. By hiding, I allowed the art world to become even more exclusive. Last night, I stood in this gallery in front of my own painting, and I was asked to leave. I was told I did not belong here. Security escorted me out because I did not look like what people think an important artist should look like. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Those who had been there the night before looked ashamed. Richard looked like he wanted to disappear. I realized that my anonymity was not protecting art, Minseo continued. It was protecting prejudice. People could pretend that great artists all came from certain backgrounds, looked a certain way, dressed a certain way. They could dismiss people like me without ever knowing what they were dismissing. She walked closer to her self-portrait. This painting shows the truth. I am invisible not because I am not important, but because people cannot see importance in someone who looks like me. They see an old woman in cheap clothes and assume I know nothing, understand nothing, am nothing. Jessica's face was bright red. She looked like she wanted to cry or run away or both. I revealed myself tonight because the art world needs to change, Minseo said. Great artists can be old women who take the subway. They can be immigrants who clean offices at night. They can be anyone with vision and dedication and something to say. Art is not about what you wear or where you come from. It is about what you create. The gallery was completely silent except for the sound of cameras clicking and video recording. Then slowly someone began to clap. It was Marcus still filming with his phone. Others joined him. The applause grew until it filled the gallery. But Minseo noticed that Richard was not clapping. Neither was Jessica. They looked horrified and she knew why. They had treated her terribly, and their treatment had been captured on Marcus's video, which was now streaming live on social media. Richard tried to recover. He stepped forward with his hand extended. Ms. Park, this is extraordinary news. I always suspected there was something special about you. I'm so honored that you chose our gallery for this revelation. Minseo looked at his extended hand but did not take it. She remembered how he had spoken to her the night before, how he had told her she did not belong, how he had treated her like she was nothing. You did not suspect anything, Minseo said quietly but firmly. Last night you asked me to leave because you thought I was not good enough to be here. You judged me by my appearance and decided I had no value. That is exactly the problem I am trying to address. Richard's hand dropped. His face showed panic. Around the gallery, phones were out. People were checking social media. Marcus's live stream had gone viral. Millions of people were watching the moment unfold in real time. The revelation was complete. Minseo Park, the simple old woman in the worn cardigan, was MS, one of the greatest artists of her generation. And everyone who had dismissed her, laughed at her, or treated her as invisible now had to face what they had done. The invisible had become visible. And the art world would never be the same. Marcus's video had 20 million views by morning. The story spread across every news outlet and social media platform. Famous artist MS revealed after being thrown out of her own exhibition, read the headlines. The video showed everything. Minseo being dismissed by Richard and Jessica. The crowd laughing at her. Then the moment of revelation, when the simple old woman proved she was the genius everyone claimed to admire. The world reacted with shock and anger. People were furious at how Minseo had been treated. They were ashamed of what the video revealed about the art world and society in general. Within hours, the story became about more than just one artist. It became about how people judge others based on appearance, how society makes certain people invisible. Richard Thornton was suspended from his position the next day. The museum's board held an emergency meeting. They released a statement apologizing to Minseo and promising to investigate discrimination in their institution. 3 days later, Richard quietly resigned. His career in the art world was over. No gallery would hire someone who had treated MS so badly. Jessica posted a tearful apology video that afternoon. She sat in her apartment crying as she explained how sorry she was. But people noticed she talked more about how the incident had hurt her career than about how she had hurt Minseo. The video made things worse. People called her apology selfish and insincere. She was quietly let go from the museum a week later. The art students who had laughed and taken photos were identified from the video. Their university art program called them in for meetings. They were required to write essays on bias and prejudice in the arts. They lost their positions as gallery interns. The experience humbled them, though it would take years for them to truly understand what they had done wrong. But not all consequences were negative. Dr. Helen Park, the conservator who had helped confirm Minseo's identity, was promoted. The museum recognized that she had been the only staff member to treat Minseo with respect and scientific objectivity. She was given a leadership role in creating new museum policies. The policies changed quickly. The Metropolitan Museum announced new rules. All visitors were to be treated with equal respect regardless of appearance. Staff would receive training on unconscious bias. The museum committed to making art more accessible to all communities, not just the wealthy. Other galleries and museums watched and learned. They began examining their own practices. How did they treat visitors who did not look wealthy? Did their staff make assumptions based on clothing or age or race? The conversation spread throughout the art world. Minseo's phone did not stop ringing for weeks. Interview requests came from every major news outlet. Publishers wanted her to write a book. Universities wanted her to speak. Television shows wanted her to appear. Museums around the world asked to display her work. She sat in her small apartment in Queens, overwhelmed by the attention. Jiwon came to visit her every evening after work at the hospital. They drank tea together and sorted through the requests. "Mom, you don't have to do any of this if you don't want to," Jiwon said. "I know," Minseo replied, "but I started this for a reason. If I hide again now, nothing will change." She chose carefully. She declined most interview requests, but agreed to a few that would reach the right audiences. She spoke to a public television program about art education. She did a long interview with a respected arts magazine. She agreed to speak at 2 universities, but only if her talk was free and open to all students, not just art majors. "I want to reach people who think art is not for them," she explained to Jiwon. "People who think they are not smart enough or educated enough or rich enough to understand art. Those are the people who need to hear this story." The most surprising revelation came 2 weeks later when Jiwon announced she had been the anonymous buyer of Invisible. The news delighted people. Minseo's daughter had purchased her mother's self-portrait for $4.2 million. When reporters asked why, Jiwon smiled. "My mother has quietly funded an art education foundation for years," Jiwon explained. "She has donated most of her earnings to help young artists from poor backgrounds. I used money from that same foundation to buy the painting. The money went right back to where my mother wanted it to go, helping others create art. People loved this story. It showed that Minseo had not kept her wealth. She had used it to lift up others who struggled as she once had. The foundation received thousands of new donations after this was revealed. People wanted to support Minseo's vision of accessible art education. Minseo used her new visibility to launch something bigger. She announced the creation of the Park Scholarship Fund. It would provide full support for artists from working-class backgrounds, not just money for supplies and tuition, but also living expenses. She knew from experience that talented artists often failed not because they lacked skill, but because they had to work multiple jobs to survive, leaving no time to create. The scholarships came with something else too. A mentorship program. The established artists volunteered to work with the scholarship recipients. They shared their knowledge, their contacts, their experience. Minseo understood that success in the art world often came from connections as much as talent. Poor artists rarely had those connections. She wanted to change that. She also partnered with community centers in low-income neighborhoods. She funded art programs that were free to anyone who wanted to learn. No requirements, no applications, just open doors and materials and teachers who cared. She remembered learning art by staring at paintings while cleaning buildings at night. Not everyone had even that opportunity. Despite her newfound fame and the revelation of her wealth, Minseo did not change her lifestyle much. She still lived in her small apartment in Queens. She still took the subway. She still wore her comfortable old clothes. When reporters asked why, she simply said, "These things have always been enough for me. Why would I need more?" But she did make one change. She started visiting galleries during their public hours dressed as she always had. She would stand in front of paintings, listening to what people said. Sometimes she would gently correct wrong information or share insights about technique. Gallery staff now recognized her, of course, but regular visitors often did not. She enjoyed these moments of being simply another person who loved art. One afternoon, 3 months after the revelation, Minseo visited the Metropolitan Museum one final time. The new director, a woman named Yuki Tanaka, had personally invited her. Yuki was the first director of color the museum had ever had. Her appointment was part of the changes sweeping through the institution. Yuki gave Minseo a private tour of the exhibition, which was still running. "We've had record attendance," Yuki said, "especially from communities that never usually visit museums. They come to see your work, but they stay to see other art too. You've opened doors that were closed for too long." They stood together in front of Invisible. The painting had become one of the most famous artworks of the decade. People came from around the world to see it. "Have things really changed?" Minseo asked. "Or will people forget once the news cycle moves on?" "Some things have changed," Yuki said honestly. "Our policies are different. Our staff thinks differently. But you're right to worry. Change is fragile. It needs constant attention and care." Minseo nodded. This was why she had agreed to remain visible despite her preference for privacy. The work was not finished. As they talked, a young girl entered the gallery with her mother. The girl was maybe 10 years old. She wore simple clothes that had been washed many times. Her shoes were worn but clean. She carried a small notebook and a pencil. The girl stood in front of Invisible for a long time. She opened her notebook and began to sketch. Her hand moved confidently. She had talent. Minseo could see it in the way she observed, the way she translated what she saw onto paper. The girl's mother stood nearby, looking uncomfortable. She glanced around at the other visitors in their expensive clothes. She clearly felt out of place. Minseo walked over to the girl. "You draw well," she said gently. The girl looked up, startled. "Thank you. I'm trying to learn the technique. See how the light works?" She pointed to the painting. "It's like the woman is glowing from inside." "Exactly right," Minseo said, smiling. "You have a good eye." The girl's mother touched her daughter's shoulder. "We should go. We're probably bothering people." "You are not bothering anyone," Minseo said firmly. "Art galleries are for everyone. For people who want to learn and create and see beautiful things. Please stay as long as you like." The mother relaxed a little. The girl went back to her sketching, completely absorbed in her work. Yuki approached quietly. She had been watching the interaction. "Do you know who that is?" she asked the mother, gesturing to Minseo. The mother shook her head. "Should I?" "That's Minseo Park. She painted this." Yuki gestured to invisible. The mother's eyes went wide. The girl stopped sketching and stared at Minseo. You painted this? The girl asked, her voice full of awe. I did, Minseo confirmed. But you look so… The girl stopped, unsure how to finish. Normal? Minseo suggested with a smile. That is because I am normal. I am a person who paints. Just like you are a person who draws. The only difference is that I have been doing it longer. The girl looked at her notebook, then back at Minseo. Do you think I could be an artist someday? A real one? Minseo knelt down so she was at the girl's eye level. You already are an artist. You create. You observe. You practice. That is what makes an artist. Not fancy clothes or expensive schools. Just dedication and love for your work. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Her mother wiped her own eyes. Keep drawing, Minseo said. Keep observing. Keep creating. And remember that art belongs to everyone, not just to people in certain neighborhoods or certain clothes. She stood and pulled a card from her pocket. She had started carrying these after the revelation. It had information about the Park Scholarship Fund and the community art programs. She handed it to the mother. When she is older, if she wants to pursue art seriously, contact us. We help young artists who need support. The mother took the card with shaking hands. Thank you. You don't know what this means, but Minseo did know. She knew exactly what it meant. She had been that young person once, desperate to create, unsure if she belonged in the world of art. She said goodbye to the girl and her mother and walked back to where Yuki stood waiting. You're good at this, Yuki observed. At what? Minseo asked. At being visible, at using your platform for good, at being the change you want to see. Minseo looked around the gallery one more time, at the diverse crowd of visitors, at the young girl still sketching, at invisible hanging on the wall, telling her story to anyone who would listen. For 20 years I believed that staying invisible would let the art speak for itself, she said. But I understand now that sometimes the artist must speak too. Not to take attention from the art, but to open doors for others, to show that art is not locked behind walls of wealth and privilege. She walked toward the exit with Yuki. As they left, she glanced back one more time. The young girl was still sketching, completely focused, comfortable now in a space that had once felt forbidden to people like her. That evening, Minseo sat in her apartment as the sun set over Queens. Her easel stood by the window, a new painting in progress. This one showed diverse people of all ages and backgrounds creating art together. Some painted on canvases, some drew in notebooks, some shaped clay, some took photographs. They worked side by side, all equal in their creativity. She was calling it visible. Jiwon arrived with dinner. They ate together, talking about their days. Normal conversation between mother and daughter. But Jiwon could see something had changed in her mother's expression. You seem at peace, Jiwon observed. I am, Minseo said. For the first time in many years, I am not hiding. It is strange and uncomfortable sometimes, but it is also right. I can do more good this way. Do you regret the years you spent hidden? Jiwon asked. Minseo thought about this. No, those years were necessary. I needed that space to develop my art without pressure or expectation. But that time has passed. Now I am needed for something different. Marcus, the young gallery worker who had first believed Minseo and documented her revelation, had become a close friend. He visited once a week to talk about art and life. His blog had exploded in popularity after the video went viral, but he had stayed humble and genuine. He used his platform to highlight other overlooked artists, just as Minseo had hoped someone would. He had just published a long article about what happened after the revelation. He interviewed Richard Thornton, who expressed deep regret for his actions. He interviewed Jessica, who was working at a small community art center now, trying to rebuild her understanding of what art meant. He interviewed the art students, the security guard, even the waiter who had asked Minseo to fetch champagne. Most expressed genuine remorse. They had learned from their mistakes. But Marcus's article made clear that individual apologies were not enough. The entire system needed to change. The art world had to become more inclusive, more accessible, more aware of its own prejudices. The article ended with Minseo's own words. Marcus had asked her what she hoped would come from revealing herself. I hope that the next young artist who walks into a gallery in worn clothes will be treated with respect, she had said. I hope that art education will become available to everyone, not just the wealthy. I hope that people will learn to see talent and genius in unexpected places, in unexpected people, and I hope that my paintings will still be valued for what they are, not just for the story behind them. The article won journalism awards, but more importantly, it kept the conversation going. Schools used it in their classrooms to discuss bias and perception. Art programs shared it with their students. People talked about it at dinner tables and in coffee shops. Change was happening. Slowly, imperfectly, but happening. 6 months after the revelation, Min Seo finished Visible. She donated it to a public school in a poor neighborhood, not to a museum where only certain people would see it, not to a wealthy collector's private home, but to a place where children who looked like the young girl in the gallery could see it every day. She hung it in the school's main hallway herself. Students gathered to watch. She spoke to them simply and directly. Art is for you, she told them. Not someday. Not if you become rich or famous. Right now, art is for anyone who wants to create, to express, to see the world differently. Do not let anyone tell you that you do not belong in the world of art. The students applauded. Some cried. Many went home that day and picked up pencils or paintbrushes for the first time, believing that maybe they too could be artists. That night, Min Seo sat at her easel one more time. She was beginning a new painting, though she did not yet know what it would become. She simply put brush to canvas and let her hand move, let her vision guide her. She was the same person she had always been. The same artist who had arrived in New York 40 years ago with nothing but dreams and determination. The same person who had painted through exhaustion and rejection and loneliness. The same Min Seo Park who had become MS, who had become invisible, who had now become visible again. The only difference was that now the world could see her. Really see her. Not just as a mysterious artist or a news story, but as a person, an old woman in comfortable clothes who happened to create extraordinary art. A human being who proved that genius and importance did not look the way people expected. She painted as dawn broke over the city. The light came through her window, golden and warm. She painted that light. She painted the feeling of a new beginning. She painted hope. The world had changed because one invisible woman had chosen to become visible. And in becoming visible, she had opened eyes to all the other invisible people who surrounded them every day. People with talents and dreams and worth that society overlooked because it was not looking in the right places. Min Seo Park painted on, her brush moving steadily across the canvas. She was creating something new, something beautiful, something that would speak to hearts and minds long after she was gone. She was visible now, but more importantly, she had made others visible too. That, she thought, was her greatest masterpiece of all.